My place card, this is. I just can't take it anymore. It was only 30 minutes after she left for the year-end party that my wife Rachel came home in tears. On the top floor of a luxury hotel, in the lavish banquet hall. What awaited her was a place card cruelly inscribed with the words "seat for the useless employee." I have poured my heart and soul into this job. Every single day, I've worked so hard, putting everything into it. And yet, this is how they treat me. In front of everyone. Something this cruel. Rachel's trembling voice shook with anguish as her shoulders quivered. Tears streamed down her cheeks, smudging her makeup. With just a single slip of paper, her pride, her very life, was on the verge of being completely shattered. I felt a chilling calm take over my mind. Anger began to surge within me. They'd better be ready for this. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing about the man who drove Rachel into this state. My shaking fingers grabbed the phone. And that man, who had cornered Rachel, was about to deeply regret what he had done. My name is Samuel. Looking back, life used to be so carefree back then. Every morning, I would take a homemade lunch prepared by my mom to school. After class, I played with my friends, and at night, my parents and I would sit down for dinner together. I thought those ordinary days would last forever. My grades were always near the top of the class. I was particularly good at math and physics, and my homeroom teacher often said, "Samuel's way of thinking is on a whole different level." I loved nothing more than seeing the happy look on my mom's face when she saw my test scores. My dad would often pat my head and say, "Samuel, you'll be able to follow whatever path you choose in the future." On days off, I'd play baseball with my dad, or we'd go as a family to the local diner. Yes, we always looked forward to that once-a-month little luxury. Even though my mom worked at the diner, she always kept a cheerful smile on her face. My dad worked at a small factory. His paycheck was modest, but we were happy. But that peaceful life was shattered in an instant. A company run by my dad's friend went bankrupt. Since my dad had signed on as a loan guarantor, a massive debt of hundreds of thousands of dollars fell on our family. Unable to bear the pressure, my dad disappeared one day without warning. The entire debt fell on my mom's shoulders. My school uniform became worn, and even when my shoes got holes in them, we couldn't afford replacements. We didn't have the money to get my hair cut, so I let it grow until it was just barely within school regulations. The same people who used to say, "You're so smart," suddenly started avoiding me. Samuel's changed a bit, hasn't he? I heard his family's drowning in debt. His dad was a guarantor, and they lost everything because of it. How can he not be embarrassed wearing such a ragged uniform? They didn't even bother lowering their voices when whispering behind my back. It was like a complete flip of their attitudes. The girls who used to crowd around me, saying, "Samuel, you're amazing," when my grades were good, now wouldn't even meet my eyes. It's not like I wanted to live like this. Skipping breakfast to come to school, barely managing with a single piece of bread for lunch. And even that won't be possible starting tomorrow. This month's living expenses have already run out. Every night, my mom is hounded by collection calls, crying as she apologizes over and over. I couldn't stand to see her like that, so I decided to drop out of high school. 6 months into my new job, I spent my days mindlessly grinding down metal parts as instructed and endlessly cleaning the filthy workshop. I was convinced I was on the fast track to the bottom of society, walking a shadowy life where no one cared about me. Maybe it was because I always looked like I was sulking, but my coworkers and even my seniors gave me cold stares. It was rare for anyone to even bother talking to me. This boring life, where I just keep getting older, is probably how my entire existence will end. But then, an encounter with a certain person brought a ray of light into my life. "You're assigned to work under Kelvin starting today." "Huh? Why me?" "It's at Kelvin's request." The factory manager, Miles, suddenly told me this, and though skeptical, I headed to the designated workshop. Miles told me to come here." "Come in." I opened the door, and there was Kelvin, intently polishing his tools. Kelvin was a veteran craftsman who had been working here for 40 years. He was highly trusted not just by Miles but also by several of our clients. From today, I'll be teaching you everything I know. He was small in stature, with dark, weathered skin from years of working with machine oil, deeply lined wrinkles, puffy eyelids, and thick lips. His appearance gave off the impression of a stubborn, middle-aged man. He was a man of few words, and his thoughts were hard to read, which initially left me feeling bewildered. Why had Kelvin specifically mentioned my name? Here, try shaping this part. He handed me a bolt which was the kind I had been machining every day. All right. I positioned myself in front of the lathe. I set the blade to the bolt's groove just as I'd been taught. Sparks flew, and the piercing sound made me wince. Let me see that. I handed him the bolt in silence, and Kelvin inspected it with a sharp, piercing gaze. Then, he murmured a single phrase. Anyone who takes products lightly has no right to make them. Ha! I responded with an insolent attitude. But he paid no attention to it and continued speaking. Come to the workshop right now. Wait, what? Without giving me a chance to refuse, he led me away. Watch my hands closely. He picked up a component with his calloused and rounded fingers that were worn smooth from years of work. This is part of an aircraft engine. He said this as he turned on the lathe and calmly began carving grooves into the piece. The focused look in his eyes was the very embodiment of a true craftsman. Samuel, pay attention. Kelvin said this as he flipped the bolt upside down and rotated it, explaining as he went. A deviation of even 0.01 millimeters isn't acceptable. If even one of these parts is defective, hundreds of lives could be at risk. That's why you need knowledge of math and physics, along with years of experience and intuition. I stared silently at the part. The polished surface shone like a mirror. It looked more like a work of art than a machine component. You were good at math, right? Then calculate this angle. Caught off guard, I hesitated but looked at the blueprint on the wall and worked out the answer. Correct. But remember, that's just numbers on a page. From that point on, I received one-on-one training, where Kelvin meticulously taught me about the properties of metals, tool selection, and the fine adjustments needed for cutting angles. Watching his hands from the side, it seemed as though he was working through the process without much thought. But in reality, he was making precise adjustments through the feel of his hands and the subtle pressure of his fingertips. I found myself completely drawn in, and before I realized it, it was almost lunchtime. Be here first thing tomorrow morning. Training starts then. The next day, my intensive training with Kelvin began. The first task was to machine a perfect circle. If the angle of the cutting tool is off by even 0.1 degrees, the surface quality will change. Feel it. Watching Kelvin operate the lathe, it felt like he was playing an instrument with incredible precision. Just give it a try. The first week was nothing but failures. If I eased up even slightly, I'd shave off too much, but if I gripped too tightly, I couldn't control the pressure properly. Determined to figure it out myself, I stayed late at the factory after work, silently running the lathe and cutting metal day after day. This won't do. The groove here is too deep. Ah! I was so close. Muttering to myself about why things weren't going well, I kept replaying Kelvin's advice in my head. Looking back, I'm amazed that I didn't throw in the towel back then. That routine continued for 2 weeks until one day. You've done well. Kelvin picked up one of the many failed pieces piled up beside me and, for the first time, gave me a smile. I was so happy I could have cried, but I held it back and tried to act as if it were no big deal. But I'm still nowhere near your level, Kelvin. Of course not. You and I aren't even in the same league. His tone was harsh, but the kindness in his eyes was unmistakable. Hey, Kelvin. What is it? Why have you done so much for me? Before I could finish, Kelvin interrupted. I have a grandson who reminds me of you. He, too, almost gave up on his life because of his family situation. What? His father was in an accident, and the family finances collapsed. He almost gave up on his dream of going to college. But he worked at a factory during the day, studied hard at night, and eventually made it through university. Kelvin. People who can work hard despite their circumstances are the ones who can take control of their lives. I saw that in you, just as I saw it in him. Kelvin. His words slowly sank into my heart, spreading warmth through me. Kelvin, I want to know more. I want to become a craftsman like you. The words came from the depths of my heart, born from the seriousness with which I had approached my work at the factory. The mentor standing before me gave me a quiet smile. You've finally woken up. That day remains etched in my memory. From then on, I began to take every task seriously. I arrived at the factory earlier than anyone else, meticulously cleaning from the entrance to the restrooms. I willingly took on the jobs no one wanted to do and stayed late, learning from Kelvin. He guided me through every step. From handling tools to mastering specific techniques. Samuel, you need to learn how to connect with people. That way, you won't have to carry everything on your own. Those words sank into my heart like a warm bowl of soup. Gradually, I began to get along better with those around me. Refusing to let unfair treatment from my seniors discourage me and actively taking on tasks others avoided. Which eventually earned Miles's trust and led to me being entrusted with more critical tasks. Strangely, the frequent defects that had seemed inevitable began to decrease. Complaints from clients disappeared. And they praised the improved quality of our products. This recognition even led to new orders from additional clients. You've got a great mentor. At the year-end gathering that year, when Miles acknowledged my hard work for the first time, I finally felt like I had found my place at the factory. With my mother, we began to steadily chip away at my father's debt. I put all of my overtime pay, earned by giving up holidays, toward repayments, making slow but consistent progress every month. What had initially felt like an insurmountable amount was reduced by half over the course of 3 years. Samuel, you've worked so hard. My mother, with tears in her eyes, marked off each repayment on the monthly schedule. The threatening calls from debt collectors had finally subsided. At the factory, I had gained recognition, our household finances were gradually stabilizing. And I could feel the weight lifting from my mother's shoulders. She no longer had to work late into the night at the diner and had recently been able to come home on time. For the first time in a long while, we could sit down and enjoy her homemade dinners together at a leisurely pace. I'm so sorry, Samuel. Because of me, you had to give up school. Mom, this isn't your fault. Besides, I take pride in the life we're living now. Though my anger toward my father for abandoning us hasn't completely faded, I've gained the confidence to keep moving forward. For the first time, I felt like I could finally do something meaningful for my parents, who had worried so much about me. That realization hit me at that moment. 7 years into working at the factory, I was entrusted with increasingly important tasks and often found myself teaching the junior workers. I began to seriously consider dedicating my life to honing my craft and living as a true artisan, just like Kelvin. Yet, at the same time, another thought started to grow in my mind that maybe there was a different path I could take. I often read articles in the newspaper about small factories going out of business. No matter how skilled the workers were, if the business failed, both the techniques and the people were lost. The skills Kelvin had passed on to me surely held value that needed to be preserved for future generations. I want to learn more about management. This thought grew stronger with each passing day. I decided it was time to share my resolve with Kelvin. Then, softening his tense expression ever so slightly, he said, I see, I understand. If you've thought it through this much, then go ahead and give it your all. But, with those words, Kelvin placed his hand on my shoulder. Don't let yourself be blinded by money. Money is just a tool to measure true value. Taking his words to heart, I threw myself into learning about management and investment. Samuel, how are things going these days? One day, Kelvin asked me this as we sat down to eat. I set my chopsticks down on the table. Thankfully, I haven't suffered significant losses, but I've been keeping an eye on global economic trends. Do you plan to spend the rest of your life only trading stocks? What? What do you mean by that? You've changed a lot since you first came here. And I mean that in a good way. The way you've eagerly studied and sought to understand the broader world, even I have to respect that. But that's exactly why. Kelvin's eyes were more serious than I had ever seen them. Use that knowledge and those eyes to save someone. Kelvin. Those words became the foundation for what would later become Artisan Futures Capital. Understanding the value of craftsmanship and investing in its future. The thought of realizing Kelvin's spirit of craftsmanship in a new form filled me with excitement. Never forget your humble beginnings, no matter how successful you become. Every time I faced off with a renowned corporation that everyone knew, Kelvin's words echoed in my mind. And now, here I am, gazing at the sunset from a high-rise office in Tokyo's prime business district. It has been 7 years since I founded Artisan Futures Capital. What started with just 3 people has grown into an investment fund company with over 100 employees. Mr. Yates, here are the documents for the new investment project. As I glanced over the papers placed on my desk, my thoughts weren't solely on the numbers. I always thought about the technology behind them and the artisans who supported it. Alright, I'll go to the factory myself to check this project out. Even though I now spent much of my time as the president meeting with executives from our investment companies, I made a point to visit the front lines whenever I could. Despite hesitant voices from employees questioning whether it was wise to stake everything on a struggling small-town factory, I trusted my intuition. Born from first-hand experience in the field, and successfully revitalized the factory, earning the title the savior of small-town factories in industry magazines. Thus, our assets under management have steadily grown, and these days, our fund is often highlighted alongside major investment funds as one to watch. It was around the time when the harsh winter cold had finally begun to ease that a request from an unfamiliar industry landed on my desk. We'd like your support in evaluating the introduction of a new caregiving robot. I promptly made arrangements to visit a care facility outside the prefecture. Today, at the facility director's request, I was scheduled to meet a female employee from Artisan, a renowned machinery manufacturer known for developing caregiving robots. This employee, though young, was said to be a highly skilled member of Artisan's systems research division, working on cutting-edge robotic developments. Excuse me. The door to the meeting room opened, and a tall, slender woman walked in. Her hair was tied back, her makeup was minimal, and her clean-cut features made it immediately clear she was strikingly beautiful. Without realizing it, I straightened my posture. I'm Rachel from Artisan. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me today. Her poised demeanor prompted me to bow my head as well. I'm Samuel from Artisan Futures Capital. It's a pleasure to meet you. Samuel, let's get right to it. Rachel took out her tablet and began her explanation. The caregiving robot we're developing is designed to replicate human movements as closely as possible. Human movements. Yes. It might be easier to understand if I show you. Essentially, we've digitized the motions of expert caregivers, people renowned in the field, and incorporated that data into the robot's software. Each movement is analyzed in detail and programmed into the robot to adapt to the needs of those receiving care. Her words piqued my interest, and I instinctively leaned forward. I see. In an industry facing a severe labor shortage, this could truly be revolutionary. Rachel's eyes lit up. Exactly. Caregiving can't be done alone. That's why we focus on supporting caregivers by utilizing the expertise of experienced professionals through technology. That's our mission. Our conversation became increasingly animated as we delved into the technical aspects and discussed future possibilities. It's an honor to work with someone like her. After finishing the facility tour, we returned to the lounge. Sitting on a bench with canned coffee in hand, we reflected on the day. Rachel explained the robot's movements with animated gestures, her passion evident. It felt as though she regarded the people receiving care as if they were her own family. A warmth and kindness that came through in her explanations. "Oh, here, this is for you." I handed her a coffee I had picked up from a vending machine in the hallway. "Thank you. But, Samuel, you're not at all what I expected." "Huh?" Her sudden words nearly made me spit out my coffee. I quickly covered my mouth with my hand in a panic. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that in a bad way. It's just, I always thought investment funds were run by pushy, flashy older men. But you're surprisingly down to earth." Her cheeks seemed to flush slightly as she said this. Well, it's true that the term investment fund isn't exactly familiar to most people. I'm fully aware that this line of work isn't well understood. I said this with a wry smile, trying to brush it off and steer the conversation in a different direction. "By the way, is there a particular reason you became interested in caregiving robots?" She placed her hands, still holding the can of coffee, on her lap and began to speak. "My grandmother passed away when I was in high school. She spent her last days in a care facility, and I often watched the staff taking care of her. It always struck me how challenging their work seemed." She learned about caregiving robots during her university years. While studying advanced technologies, she frequently visited companies working on caregiving robots, and each visit left her deeply inspired. "I want to support people through technology. That's the foundation of my research." I found myself captivated by the resolute look in her eyes. "Samuel, you're from a small factory background, right?" "Yes." It was tough at first. From there, I began talking freely, sharing stories from my student days and my time working in the factory. "Even someone like you has faced hardships." She said this thoughtfully. "In this line of work, challenges are a constant." I gave a wry smile and took a sip of my coffee. "Thank you for today. I'd be happy to see you again." Rachel's parting words as I was leaving lingered in my mind, refusing to fade. After that, I found myself making excuses to visit her lab more frequently. Each visit, and every conversation we had, became the one thing I looked forward to the most. "Rachel." "Samuel, thank you, as always. How's everything going today?" As I handed her a bag filled with Japanese sweets, I glanced toward the robot in the back of the room. She explained that they were making final adjustments in preparation for the last round of testing. "I don't want to get in the way, so I'll just take a quick look and leave." As I adjusted my bags, Rachel hesitantly said, Samuel." "Yes?" I looked over to see Rachel hesitating, fidgeting slightly. "What's wrong?" I moved closer to her to avoid disturbing the other employees. "Do you have time tonight?" "What?" The unexpected question caught me off guard, and I felt myself blush despite my usual composure. She glanced around before leaning in to whisper in my ear. "If you don't mind, I'd like to have a one-on-one conversation with you." "I don't mind at all." "Good." Our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us looked away. "Rachel, do you have any favorite foods?" She seemed momentarily taken aback by the abruptness of my question, but then, noticing my nervous expression, burst into laughter. "Did I say something strange?" "Sorry, Samuel. It's just that you're so confident and assertive when it comes to work, but outside of it, you're surprisingly innocent." "Well, I'm not used to this kind of thing. But I appreciate it. I like that you're so considerate about keeping a comfortable distance." Looking at Rachel as she spoke, I realized how strong my feelings for her had become. We started meeting outside of work more often, and it didn't take long before we became a couple. Eventually, we got married and started our life together as a family. A year passed. You're in a great mood today, aren't you? It had been 6 months since our daughter, Yvonne, was born. Today marked her first day at daycare. Rachel, eager to return to work as soon as possible, had spent her maternity leave tirelessly looking for a daycare center. Finally, she secured a spot at a certified daycare near our home. Balancing work while managing daycare turned out to be far more challenging than we had anticipated. Still, we worked together, adjusting our schedules and sharing the responsibilities of pickups, drop-offs, and caring for Yvonne. Rachel never complained, always greeting me with a smile when I came home, her strength shining through in every moment. But unbeknownst to me, Rachel's struggles had already begun. "Rachel, this project is being scrapped." The chilling words from her manager, Simon, froze the atmosphere in the meeting room. Rachel quickly tried to clarify. "But Simon, the project received excellent evaluations during the trial phase, and it's already been approved by the higher-ups." "Evaluations? What are you even talking about?" Simon scoffed dismissively. A sharp-tongued figure who had risen to the position of department manager after 30 years in system development. Simon had built a reputation for being brilliant yet ruthless. "Did you slap this proposal together in a rush before leaving early yesterday?" He flipped through the documents with a cold gaze. "No, I revised it several times." "Then why is the cost calculation so sloppy? And the market analysis? It's superficial at best." When Rachel tried to respond, he silenced her with a raised hand. "Besides, didn't you leave a meeting early last week because of daycare issues? Do you really think such a half-hearted effort will get an important project like this approved?" The snide remarks didn't end in the meeting room. "Oh, another call from daycare?" Simon's voice boomed deliberately as he addressed Rachel, who was holding her phone. Colleagues whispered among themselves, their murmurs barely audible but stinging nonetheless. Simon, seemingly satisfied, added with mock concern, "Parenting must be tough. It must be stressful not being able to focus on your work." Rachel, her shoulders hunched, left the office. It was only a matter of time before she found herself cornered in yet another meeting. It happened during a presentation led by Rachel for the major project aimed at the practical implementation of caregiving robots. Over several years, Rachel and her team had painstakingly built a foundation through detailed field experiments at caregiving facilities and cutting-edge AI research. Her colleagues, who had worked alongside her, fully understood and supported the project. However, as soon as Rachel finished her presentation, Simon let out an exaggerated sigh and leaned his arm on the table. "Ha! Rachel, haven't you said all that before?" "Yes, but we've conducted additional interviews in caregiving settings and refined the integration of AI with human interaction." "That human connection thing again? You really like that phrase, don't you?" Everyone in the meeting room looked at Rachel with sympathy, but Simon's dismissive remarks showed no sign of stopping. Maybe such a big project was too much for someone raising a child? Rachel's face stiffened at his words. "I admit, there were times when I caused inconvenience. However, I worked closely with my team during those periods to ensure everything was prepared. So you're aware you've been a burden. Well, in that case, how can we trust someone who only gives half their effort? Maybe this project itself needs to be reevaluated." Simon tossed the materials onto the desk as if they were worthless. The atmosphere in the meeting room grew unbearably heavy. Rachel bit her lip, unable to respond. 3 months had passed since she returned to work, but she had constantly felt like she was only halfway there. The pressure to keep up with her peers often left her struggling to make progress in her research. Even so, she had been trying to find her own balance between work and parenting. Simon's thoughtless remarks, however, cut deep, like sharp blades. "Simon." Rachel began speaking, struggling to keep her voice steady and firm. "This project relies on the voices from the field. Without them, we can't move forward. If I could just..." All right, I've heard it all dozens of times already. Simon glanced down at the documents, his expression openly irritated. Caregiving robots are a beacon of hope for the caregiving industry. We have to make them a reality. Please, at the very least, let someone from this team take responsibility and move the project forward. Come on, don't be so naive. Simon shifted his gaze toward her without moving his head. You may have gotten away with a few indulgences because of your past achievements, but that won't work with me. By next week, I want a completely new proposal unrelated to caregiving robots. With that curt dismissal, he walked out of the meeting room, leaving everyone in stunned silence. Rachel! Her colleagues called out to her with concern, their voices heavy with empathy. However, Rachel gently shook her head and said, "It's fine. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to working with you." Holding back her frustration, Rachel made her way toward the door to leave the meeting room. Oh, Rachel. I almost forgot to mention something to you. Simon re-entered the room, a smug grin on his face. You've been working a lot of overtime since coming back, haven't you? With such a young child, doesn't your husband have anything to say about it? My family supports my work. Oh, well, that's great. It's nice to have such an understanding family. The overtime wasn't by choice. It was caused by the countless menial tasks Simon kept dumping on her, forcing her to push her own work to the back burner. Hearing such a sarcastic comment from the man responsible made Rachel's face tighten with anger. I feel bad for your family, though. Having to deal with such a selfish person. Stop making assumptions without knowing the facts. But then, he said something truly outrageous. If you'd like to continue working at this company, there's always the option of shortened working hours. In that case, he leaned in close, his smirk growing wider, and whispered in her ear. Starting tomorrow, your desk will be moved from the development department to a corner in the general affairs section. That way, you can handle both work and parenting, right? What? But the reason I came back just now was to let you know. I'll hand over the details in writing later. With a triumphant expression, Simon left the room. This can't be happening. The sympathetic looks from earlier had vanished. Even the team members who had worked alongside her avoided her gaze as they quietly left the meeting room. That night, I'm home. As Rachel returned home, her voice trembling, she gently touched Yvonne's sleeping cheek, tears silently streaming down her face. Unable to bear it, I wrapped my arms around her from behind. I'm sorry. I've been so half-hearted with everything, and now everything I've worked for feels like it's been for nothing. As she sobbed uncontrollably, all I could do was stroke her shoulders, offering silent comfort. Before we knew it, the cold season arrived, bringing with it the busiest time of the year, which was December. The unexpected department transfer. To Rachel, it felt like nothing less than a demotion. For the first few days, she sat at her new desk, thinking back to her time in the development department, her chest tightening with each memory. But to her surprise, the people in the general affairs department were far warmer than she had expected. Rachel, let's take a tea break. Oh, is that a picture of Yvonne? She's adorable. I'm raising kids too. It's tough, but the people here really support me. Everyone spoke to her naturally, often offering advice about parenting. Here, there were no icy stares from Simon to fear. Rachel, the year-end party is coming up. This year it's at the top floor of a hotel. Really? Yes, come with us. Forget about that manager. We've got your back. Exactly. Let's unwind for once and have some real fun. Her senior colleagues spoke to her kindly. Rachel smiled modestly and nodded in response. The painful memories of the development department began to fade, little by little. I'm looking forward to it. Rachel applied light makeup, her heart fluttering with excitement for the dinner gathering after so long. Mommy, you look so pretty. Yvonne beamed at her, jumping up and down as if she were seeing a princess. I spoke gently as she finished getting ready. Have a great time tonight. But don't overdo it with the drinks. I know. Seeing Rachel smile like that, I felt an unexpected flutter in my chest. It had been so long since I'd seen her laugh so freely and innocently. All right, I'm heading out. Rachel left the house with a bright smile on her face. But just 30 minutes later, I'm home. What happened? I rushed over to her, and Rachel clung to me, trying to stifle her sobs as she began to cry. My place card, look at this. I just can't take it anymore. Collapsing to the floor, Rachel began to recount the cruel incident she had just experienced. The venue was on the top floor of a luxury hotel, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. With Christmas just around the corner, a grand chandelier hanging from the ceiling bathed the room in warm light. And appetizers were already neatly arranged on tables draped in pure white cloths. Normally dressed in suits, the employees arrived in glamorous attire, gathering at the venue in small groups. The female employees had taken extra care with their makeup, while the male employees adjusted their ties. Their faces filled with anticipation for the annual year-end party. Rachel arrived slightly late. Stepping off the elevator, she walked down the hallway toward the venue, glancing at her reflection in the mirror. Her pastel-colored dress, so different from her usual lab attire, exuded an air of elegance and festivity. Sorry I'm late, huh? The moment she opened the door, she sensed something was off. Every employee's eyes turned toward her at once. In their gazes, she could see a mix of pity and discomfort, emotions she couldn't quite place. Noticing the awkward glances being cast her way, she wondered what was going on as she diligently searched for the seat assigned to her in advance. There it is, huh? What is this? Looking closer, beneath her name, it read seat for the useless employee. Rachel's seat is right over there. Simon's voice came from the side, but Rachel couldn't bring herself to look at her boss's face. See? That's your spot. I even made a special place card just for you. It's a perfect fit, don't you think? His tone dripped with mockery, and the smirk in his voice was impossible to miss. Oh, can't read it? Maybe, like your dreamlike ideas, you're too out of touch with reality. Rachel bit her lip hard, clutching her hands so tightly her nails dug into her palms as she fought back tears. What does this seat card even mean? Isn't it obvious? What? The secretarial staff gathered around Simon exchanged malicious glances and smirks. A person who barely does any work and still collects a paycheck doesn't deserve anything more. You should be grateful you even got transferred to another department. In that moment, something inside Rachel snapped. A wave of anger surged through her. You're wrong. Rachel's voice echoed across the banquet hall. My proposal isn't some fantasy. I've spoken directly with Artisans, and enough. Simon's angry shout cut her off, silencing the room with its sharpness. The festive atmosphere of the venue froze entirely. It felt to Rachel as though everything she had built over 11 years had been shattered into pieces by that single seat card. Unable to bear it any longer, she fled the venue. Before she knew it, she was standing in front of her house. I can't do this anymore. Come inside first. It's cold out here. I gently wrapped my arms around Rachel's shoulders and guided her into the living room. Sitting on the sofa, Rachel remained silent, her head bowed for a while. In her hand, she clutched the place card tightly. Then, with a trembling voice, she began to pour out her feelings all at once. 11 years. For 11 years, I've worked with conviction. Sure, there were plenty of tough times, but whenever an idea struck, it was such a thrill to bring it to life with my team. But now, Rachel covered her face, her voice cracking with tears. Now I'm scared. Even when I have new ideas, I'm too terrified to speak up in meetings, afraid of what he might say next. I sat silently, listening as she continued. Ever since Simon came, he's rejected every single one of my ideas. He says AI combined with artisan skills is inefficient. But I believe in it. I believe that only by merging human warmth with technology can we create real caregiving support. Her hand tightened around the place card again and again. I'm used to being belittled. But today was different. In front of everyone, in such a humiliating way. Her voice faltered, and the tears she had been holding back spilled freely. Maybe I really can't do anything anymore. That's enough. I said it quietly but firmly. You don't have to say anything more. You've been through enough. I pulled her into a gentle embrace. Rachel, you've been doing so much balancing work, taking care of the house, and being there for Yvonne. That's more than enough. You've done incredibly well. The thought of someone breaking her spirit like this, someone as hardworking as her, was unbearable. I decided then and there to put an end to it. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number. Mr. Moore, I need to speak with you first thing tomorrow morning about Simon. After a brief pause, the tense voice of the company president responded. Understood. I'll see you in my office at 8 a.m. As I placed the receiver back down, I clenched my fist tightly, silently but with resolute determination. The man who had driven Rachel to this point would come to deeply regret his actions. Before 8 a.m., I arrived at the president's office on the 50th floor of Inesys headquarters. Normally, access to the president's office required going through a secretary, but today was an exception. Seated on the plush sofa, I noticed Mr. Moore occasionally glancing at me and then at the clock on the wall. 5 minutes to go. A sharp knock echoed through the room. Excuse me. The door opened, and Simon entered confidently, a teacup in hand. Completely unaware of my presence, he adjusted the collar of his expensive suit and turned to Mr. Moore. Good morning, Mr. Moore. The year-end party yesterday was a great success. Everyone seemed to enjoy the surprise with the place cards I prepared. With a grin on his face, Simon began speaking and finally noticed my presence. His face immediately shifted to one of clear confusion. Who might this gentleman be? My name is Samuel. I'm Rachel's husband. At my words, Simon's expression froze for a moment. But he quickly replaced it with a contemptuous smirk. Oh, so you're Rachel's husband. Do you have a complaint about your wife or are you planning to interfere with our company's personnel decisions? Let me make it clear. We are already burdened with the trouble of dealing with an employee who can't even balance work and parenting. Each word he spoke only fueled the fire of anger within me. I thought of how hard Rachel had worked to juggle her job and parenting, the sacrifices she had made. The image of that cruel place card at the party flashed in my mind, and my fist trembled. But I maintained my composure, slowly pulling out a business card and handing it to him. I'm Samuel, CEO of Artisan Futures Capital. In that instant, the arrogance melted off Simon's face like ice under a blazing sun. A figure known in the industry as the savior of small-town factories. Realizing that the head of a manufacturing-focused investment fund was standing before him, Simon's eyes widened in shock. You mean, you're... The arrogant, condescending attitude he had displayed just moments ago vanished. And Simon slumped into his chair as though his strength had left him. The look in his eyes betrayed clear fear. Simon. I spoke calmly, breaking the silence. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your position as department head. What authority do you have to do that? Our firm is your company's largest shareholder, holding a 15% stake. As the majority investor, surpassing even your main bank, I have the authority to make this decision. I see. Simon's face twisted into a bitter expression. I see, so that's what this is about. You're favoring Rachel because she's your wife, aren't you? At home. She must be nagging you every night about that place card. Poor thing, having to appease your wife's mood to the point of showing up at her company. In the end, an investor meddling in company personnel is just acting on personal feelings. Savior of small-town factories? What a joke! It's laughable, really. That's not true. I firmly denied his claim. I chose to invest in your company because I deeply resonated with its vision of harmony between people and technology. Preserving artisan skills and connecting them to the future is supposed to be your company's philosophy. Philosophy? Don't make me laugh. Simon raised his voice, his tone filled with disdain. Your wife keeps shouting about AI this and AI that, trying to take jobs away from artisans. How is that aligned with our philosophy? Is that really the case? I replied calmly. Have you even looked at her designs? That caregiving robot can't function without the expertise of skilled artisans. It's designed entirely around the premise of leveraging their craftsmanship. That's impossible. Last week, I visited the factory and showed Sarah's designs to the artisans, and they all said things like, "This will allow our skills to shine, and it's a great opportunity to pass our techniques on to the next generation." Simon's face grew pale. Someone who doesn't know the field, no, someone who doesn't even try to see the field, what could they possibly understand? I delivered my words sharply. Sarah has visited the field every week, listening carefully to the voices of the artisans. And you? You've done nothing but push people into corners with your theoretical musings. That's a lie. It's all lies, every bit of it. Simon suddenly shouted, his voice echoing in the room. He sprang from his chair, wildly flailing his arms, completely losing his composure. They all start with sweet words like that. Harmony with AI? Honoring artisan skills? Don't make me laugh. His eyes were bloodshot, and beads of sweat glistened on his forehead. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen artisans lose their jobs because of AI implementation, lured in with promises like, "Your skills are valuable, and let's create a new era together," only to be discarded in the end, and I've witnessed it time and time again. Watching so many artisans left stranded, their livelihoods destroyed. Simon, stop this. Just as Mr. Moore tried to calm Simon, the sound of the door opening slowly filled the room. Excuse me. An elderly man stepped inside. He had a small frame and hands weathered and darkened by years of factory work. It was Kelvin, my mentor, the man who had changed my life. Kelvin, I'm sorry to have called you here. I bowed deeply. As a representative of the artisans, I've asked my mentor from my factory days to join us today. Simon stared at Kelvin as if frozen in place. His voice trembled. Grandpa. Yes, Simon. It's been a while. Kelvin approached Simon, his grandson, with a gentle smile. His eyes held the same warmth they did when he guided me back in the factory. Simon, I understand your feelings all too well. You want to protect the skills of the artisans. You want to safeguard our world. That's how you feel, isn't it? Simon hung his head and gave a small nod. You've always been proud of our work as artisans. I remember how your eyes lit up every time you visited the factory, watching me work. Kelvin placed his hand on his grandson's shoulder. That hand bore countless scars, etched from a lifetime of craftsmanship. But that's why you were afraid, weren't you? Afraid that AI would take away our jobs, that artisans would lose their place. It must have hurt to think of our skills fading away. Simon's shoulders began to tremble. But you made a mistake in how you tried to protect it. You pushed people away and hurt them. How can you protect anything that way? Kelvin's voice was gentle but carried an unshakable strength. Samuel showed me Rachel's designs. They're not what you think. They don't erase our skills as artisans. They're a new way to pass our craft on to the next generation. But, Grandpa, do you remember? When you were working at the factory while attending college, you used to say all the time, "I want to find a way to adapt to the new era while preserving the skills of the artisans." A faint glimmer of tears appeared in Simon's eyes. "Your feelings were valid," Kelvin said gently. "But in trying so hard to protect, you lost sight of what's truly important. The pride of a craftsman doesn't lie in hurting others. It lies in the determination to create something better." Kelvin looked intently into Simon's face. "The care you have for the craft and for the artisans, it's something that means everything to us. But that care shouldn't be used to hurt. It should be passed on to the next generation." Kelvin's calm words resonated through the room, carrying a profound weight. It was the same warmth and unwavering conviction I had felt back when he taught me in the factory. I stepped forward, speaking quietly yet with certainty. "Simon, if you take a closer look at Rachel's designs, you'll understand. That caregiving robot couldn't exist without the skills of artisans." Simon raised his head slightly, his eyes searching. "Each precision component of the machine requires the indispensable skill of artisans. A margin of error of even 0.1 millimeters isn't allowed. Such delicate craftsmanship is absolutely essential. That's why Rachel visited the factory so often, listening to the opinions and insights of the artisans." I glanced at Kelvin and continued. "But you refused to see anything. Deciding from the start that AI would take away artisans' jobs, and you never once listened to Rachel's ideas all the way through. Even though she never intended for anything like that from the beginning." Simon's expression wavered. "In fact, it's your dismissive attitude that risks undermining the work of the artisans. You were the one shutting the door to a future where new technology and traditional craftsmanship could coexist." "Me? Undermine the artisan's work?" The strength drained from Simon's knees, and he collapsed to the floor, sitting as if defeated. Covering his face with both hands, his shoulders trembled uncontrollably. "No, it's all wrong. I was trying to protect. Simon's tearful words echoed through the silent president's office. Kelvin slowly lowered himself to the floor, sitting beside Simon. "Samuel, please forgive him." Kelvin looked up at me. "Do you remember the story I once told you? About the young man who struggled with his family circumstances but worked his way up through sheer determination?" "Yes. I remembered." Kelvin often spoke about that person back at the factory. That young man was Simon. Kelvin gently patted his grandson's back and continued. "His father collapsed after an accident, and the family finances took a turn for the worse. He nearly gave up on his dream of going to college. But instead, he worked at the factory by day and studied tirelessly at night to put himself through school." Simon lifted his face and looked at his grandfather. His eyes were brimming with tears. He would arrive at the factory earlier than anyone, clean the floors, and willingly take on the jobs no one else wanted to do. Kelvin's voice carried a hint of nostalgia. "And when I fell ill, he even took a leave of absence from school to support the factory. He cared deeply about the artisans and cherished the field more than anyone." Kelvin turned to me. "That's why the fear of AI taking over the artisan's work clouded his judgment. His desire to protect the craft was so strong that it blinded him to new possibilities." I saw my former self in Simon. A figure desperately trying to rise above their circumstances. He had only misdirected that determination. I walked over to the window, gazing at the city lights, and began to speak. "Simon, Artisan Futures Capital has an affiliated company called the Manufacturing Training Center." Simon lifted his head slightly, listening. "It's a facility dedicated to the fusion of AI and artisan techniques. It brings together veteran craftsmen and young engineers to explore the future of manufacturing." Turning back to Simon, I continued. "We need your experience, your technical skills from the factory, your understanding of the field, and your knowledge of management. Use all of that to contribute to training the next generation of artisans in this new era." Simon's eyes widened in surprise. Then, slowly, he stood up. "But, am I qualified for that?" "You are," I said firmly. As Kelvin said, you care about the artisans and value the field more than anyone. All you need to do is direct that passion in the right way. Be the bridge between technical experts like Rachel and the artisans. After a long silence, Simon bowed deeply. Please. Let me try. His voice was quiet, but it carried a clear sense of determination. A look of relief spread across Kelvin's face. Simon's new journey was about to begin. A year had passed since that tumultuous time. Gracing the cover of the industry magazine Japan Manufacturing Innovation was the AI caregiving robot developed by Rachel. AI times artisans, the dawn of a new era. Under that headline was a large photograph of the latest caregiving robot AI gently assisting an elderly woman. That's incredible, Rachel. I murmured to myself as I eagerly read through the article. Spanning 10 pages, the piece was a glowing review of the system Rachel and her team had developed. At the annual exhibition, the Inesis booth was swarmed with industry professionals. Rachel, calm and composed, explained the system with confidence. She seemed like a completely different person from the Rachel who had come home crying after that year-end party. Now, businesses eager to implement caregiving robots continuously sought partnerships, and Inesis was overwhelmed with inquiries. Rachel received endless questions about new system installations and proposals for development projects, keeping her busy day after day. Meanwhile, Simon had also embarked on a new path at the Manufacturing Training Center. Simon, could you help me with this parts machining method? Of course. Let's check it out with the artisans together. The once overbearing demeanor was gone. Now, Simon stood as a bridge between the field's craftsmen and young engineers, bringing them together. At the training center, where the fusion of AI and craftsmanship was being pursued, Simon utilized his extensive knowledge and experience to their fullest. Thanks to Simon, I now have a much better understanding of artisan techniques. This reflected the trust he had earned from the trainees. Occasionally, Rachel was invited as a guest lecturer. She and Simon were often seen passionately discussing the coexistence of AI and humans. One evening, I stood on the balcony with Rachel, gazing up at the night sky. Yvonne was already fast asleep, her soft breaths filling the quiet bedroom. Hey, do you remember? Rachel asked softly. That night after the year-end party. Yeah. I pulled her closer. At that time, I really thought I was finished. But you stood by me. Rachel leaned into me, resting her face against my chest. You cried with me, you got angry for me, and you never laughed at my dreams. Of course not. I gently stroked her hair. I've been there too. Back when I was working at the factory, when no one paid any attention to me, Kelvin reached out and taught me the importance of believing in people. We're kind of alike, aren't we? Rachel said with a smile. We faced setbacks, we were saved by someone, and now we're trying to help others. Yeah, I guess we are. We sat quietly, side by side, watching the town lights sparkle in the distance. Eventually, Rachel spoke with a determined voice. I'm going to keep working hard. I want to support the people in the caregiving field and create spaces where the skills of artisans can thrive. And I'll support you as best I can, as your partner and an investor. Thank you. Tears glistened faintly in her eyes. I'm lucky, aren't I? I have a job I'm passionate about, and someone who understands and supports me. From the bedroom, we suddenly heard Yvonne shifting in her sleep. We exchanged glances and couldn't help but smile. Yeah, we really are lucky. The night breeze gently brushed through our hair. Feeling Rachel's warmth beside me, I whispered in my heart. Everyone faces setbacks at some point. But as long as you don't give up, a path will always open up. And the ones who light that path are always the people who matter most, standing right beside you. All right, let's do our best tomorrow. Yeah. We held each other's hands tightly and looked up at the night sky, waiting for a new morning to arrive. Tomorrow would surely bring new challenges. But there was no fear anymore. Because we had an unshakable bond to carry us forward.